The death of digital, yeah, it is meant to be intentionally provocative, mainly because I've run a digital agency for the last 10 years and still sort of do. I think what I just want to explain and talk to you about, though, is how I think the term is increasingly redundant and should be seen as such. For those who don't know, Holler, my company, we class ourselves a creative agency these days, I guess. We started 10 years ago, and it was a very, very different place, and I'll speak briefly about that. But the whole media landscape has altered to such a massive extent. It's altered, frankly, in the last 12 months, let alone the last 10 years. So the way we describe ourselves is that we prioritise engagement over advertising. But what we learnt a lot about whilst doing that was that it wasn't the right way of doing things to simply put banners up in front of people's faces online or to simply interrupt what people were doing, because it was quite clumsy, and frankly you've got better things to do than spend your day swerving a banner or a pop-up. So what we thought online and what digital enabled us even 10 years ago was a much, much more rich medium that we could actually become really playful in. We could create rich content experiences. It was about creating content that people could share or get excited by or love or should show other people. I was speaking to someone only yesterday, and frankly being out of the office for 2 days feels like you are totally out of it at the moment. It's such is the speed of change in an agency, I think, like us, and in the world that is and was digital. As a company, you end up having to be not just one step ahead, but like 10 steps ahead. We often use this phrase, kind of technology as a facilitator. The very worst thing we could ever do is a client comes to us with a business problem or a brief, and then you go, the answer is an iPhone app. You've got to think about what the hell the people actually want. Digital, and what it was, what it is now all about the depth, and this kind of iceberg motif, so I guess the point that what we in advertising and brands and stuff call it above the line, i.e. all your TV and your print, is that. But this is what digital can afford to give you. It's everything else. So all of those posters is just the tip. Content goes. Content is still king. Everything you come up with, everything that we're making, everything that we're doing, it's all about that content. And media and all of that stuff will end up obeying the rules of the content that you make. It's such a powerful kind of proposition like that. I think there's this thing called the gamification of everything, and a lot of people think that ultimately turning, frankly, the world of real life into a game is cool. Again, what is interesting is that it's real world. So it's starting as a digital idea, it lives digitally, maybe on your phone or online, but it's about the world that we live in. And this is where digital can't just be siloed. It can't just be this, oh yeah, but that's a new media thing. It isn't, it's bollocks, it's part of everything. It's literally ingrained in the tapestry of our lives now. The other thing is, you know, you've got things like Facebook where they've been so smart, is this, the like button. If you're now a brand or a website or a film or a TV show, if you don't have that like button, then you're missing a trick, because you're not enabling your content to be easily shared. Here's a good example, the whole world of apps. The iPhone has utterly changed things. For the last probably, frankly, 10 years of me running this agency, every year supposedly was the year of mobile, and year it's happening. But I've known no other time than the change and the shift that's happened once iPhones kind of come on the scene. The scale of the app economy is absolutely huge. You've got 5 billion phone apps sold by June 2010. 225,000 in number of apps in the App Store now. That's a lot. And when you think of making an app, that suddenly means, Christ, that's hard to get some cut through. So again, these are really big statistics. It means that if you are creators of content, there's a big opportunity here to put that content in people's hands and in front of their faces, very literally. It causes prolonged, repeat brand engagement. I don't want this to be too brandy, but it's really important. When I talk about brands, I just mean content, really almost full stop. You know, getting people associated with it and seeing it and playing with it and using it is a big deal. It creates word of mouth, that thing like sitting around the pub and talking about it and sharing it. That's a big value. And it isn't advertising, as far as we're aware. We don't see it as the big ad for some washing up liquid that's interrupted our viewing of Coronation Street. We're just playing with something, aren't we? That's very innocent. We're just using something. We're just showing someone something. It's a brilliant bit of advertising right there. Loyal fans stick with you. Fans champion you. Fans tell each other about you. And they even market to one another. Now, if they're doing all of that, you're totally winning. For a brand, for example, it isn't their marketing teams pulling the strings of media anymore. it is this audience. It is you lot, it's me, it's you. Because we are brand guardians. We're the people controlling word of mouth. Rather than brands and content producers and people spending their time worrying about people who are having a pop at them on Facebook, they're actually spending their time now doing lovely things to them, surprising them, delighting them, giving them things, replying directly. So the Old Spice example is probably one of the best, and it's been mimicked 1,000 times. And I think it's already outdated that 87% of 16 to 24-year-olds watch TV with their laptop open. Now this is a massive deal. So when I started working with Channel 4 a few years ago, for example, they were absolutely scared stiff by the fact that people were basically online, and they were worried that it was just bastardising their TV audiences. They thought, well, if people are online and they're looking at their websites, they're not going to be watching our TV shows anymore. Weirdly, what's happened is rather than the internet becoming this mad threat to telly, it's actually starting to show a rise again in event TV. So the very notion of sitting there with your laptop open whilst watching telly is never better shown than when, for example, you're tweeting alongside a show that you're watching. So we worked on a show, and it's called 7 Days. We created something called ChatNap, which was meant to go alongside this show called 7 Days. And the idea that we were taking this phenomenon that was going on, which is social television, which is people with their laptops open watching the show, and we wanted to take that a stage further. But one of the aspects of the show that was interesting is that the show was filmed right up until broadcast. So if the show went out, say, on a Thursday night, I can't remember when it was filmed, say, right up until the Wednesday. So it was almost as live. So when they came to us with a brief and said, what can we do as part of a multi-platform thing, we thought that was tremendously exciting. And we thought, wouldn't it be lovely to play back right at them what people are thinking? Because people are watching the show, they'll be tweeting alongside the show, they'll be Facebook alongside the show, and all of that opinion will already exist. And for these people to suddenly see that opinion and hear it, that then might inform or it literally influence their lives. We had a concept that was effectively create something, which we ended up calling ChatNav, that would allow all of this opinion and noise that you would be making whilst watching the telly, aggregate it and let the people in the show read it and then potentially influence what they do. So we wanted to just play in this whole world that TV has always fueled open discussion. You know, we all shout at the telly, it's all started there. So we wanted to do something that facilitated everyone coming together, sharing their thoughts, sharing their opinions, provide what we saw then as this collective conscience so the characters in the show could tap into it. What you ended up with stuff like this, a tweet from someone. It's weird bitching about people on 7 Days, watching people on 7 Days, talking about people bitching on Twitter. It becomes this kind of TV eating itself. It might be a bit too introspective, it might be a bit too eating itself, but I think for all of us and what we're talking about, and for you guys and for film and TV and content producers and distributors and makers and anyone dealing with content full stop, how you're playing with behaviours, remember what I was going on about at the start, how you're playing with what people are doing naturally all the time can start to inform the content that you're making. With Red Bull, we do loads of little stuff with Red Bull. We made this thing called Red Bull Reporter quite a few years ago now, but it's now in its 4th year, I think, so go and have a look at it if you get a chance. Red Bull Reporter is purely aimed at getting people to understand what Red Bull do. They do all these amazing events globally, so we created a brand, a platform, which was to call for writers, photographers, documentary makers, filmmakers to come and be a Red Bull reporter. But again, it's how the whole thing just fits together. It's not just a new media project, it's real world events covering people in a real world way with real people, but it just so happens we disseminate the content through online and through digital, and it's how you consider it in those kind of ways.